My name is Outi Arajärvi. I'm very happy to meet Tiffany Easthom here, that she's ready to tell us about the most recent Syrian project of Nonviolent Peaceforce. Nonviolent Peaceforce is an international organization working on unarmed civilian peacekeeping in many parts of the world, like in South Sudan, Myanmar, Philippines, and now also in Syria. I would like to ask you, Tiffany, maybe you could briefly introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you. My name is Tiffany Easthom. I'm currently serving as the Regional Director for Nonviolent Peaceforce in the Middle East, tasked with establishing Nonviolent Peaceforce, or NP's, presence there, first through the implementation of our new program in Syria. And I come through this work from about 10 years of unarmed civilian peacekeeping and protection work, first with Peace Brigades International, where I served in Indonesia, and then I started with Nonviolent Peaceforce as the country director in Sri Lanka. I have just spent the last 5 years as the country director for NP in South Sudan, and as I mentioned previously, most recently, I'm now based in Lebanon, setting up NP in the Middle East.
Syria is the most hottest places, most dangerous places in the world at the moment. How it come that in Nonviolent Peaceforce is now working in Syria?
Sure, that's the most common question we get. Yeah. How is it possible for us to work there? I mean, I think how we came to having a project to work in and on Syria has been, it is the most tragic, violent place on the earth at the moment, the most violent conflict. And so as an organization that focuses on violence reduction and civilian protection, we felt called, and the impetus, the imperative to be able to try and implement some degree of programming to contribute to improving the safety and security of at least some civilians inside and around Syria was really important. Of course, it's extraordinarily complex. It's an area where we have to really adapt the way that we're working in terms of having access to, being able to work to a place that we actually don't, as internationals, have physical access to. So we've set up an office in Beirut, in Lebanon, so just a couple hours away from Damascus, be able to work as an NGO in the region. And our initial project that we're working on is we've got some funding from the EU to be able to work with Syrians who are living inside Syria. Basically, we're partnering with the Syrian Civil Coalition, or the Arabic word for that is Tamas, and it's a network of about 60 civil society organizations and activists who are living inside Syria, implementing programs sort of along the peace spectrum. So things related to human rights and monitoring and interventions, various protection and social protection issues. And we're working with them. And the program is about training members of that network in unarmed civilian protection and peacekeeping work. So they come out of Syria and meet us in various locations, depending on where they are living in Syria, where they can go, which borders are open, and we're doing intensive training with them as if we would do with our own staff. So we're doing they're going through 2 weeks of intensive residential training in unarmed civilian protection and peacekeeping. And then they form teams themselves in their geographic locations, take that back inside Syria, and then whatever works for them, what at the very local level do they see that they think that they can intervene on using the skills and strategies and actions of UCP work in their community to make it more safer and more secure for themselves, their families, and their communities. What we have realized is that it depends on where you're living inside Syria, where you can go to. So for example, if you're living in Damascus right now, or in the region in Damascus, even south of there, you can come into Lebanon, you can cross that border. But if you are living in the northeast and the Kurdish-held territories, you can't make it necessarily to Lebanon, but you could make it into Erbil, so Kurdistan, Iraq. So what we are doing is holding a number of trainings in the regions to try and be able to have as much reach as possible so that people from all over Syria can participate. And second to that, and something that we've not done before, but we're getting a lot of requests for, is to develop an online learning process for the besieged areas. And so that will be our second phase. We'll get the in-person trainings done first and understand best how that is working, and then learn from the participants themselves what they think would be useful for people in besieged areas who maybe can't leave where they are but might still have internet connections, and maybe do some work via Skype or other ways that we are able to deliver some ideas and be able to answer questions and give some mentoring and coaching for people who are trying to work in those areas.
And are there any plans to go to Syria itself from?
That's always on our mind. It's always on our mind. And so, like with any conflict environment, the situation is dynamic and ever changing. And so, the way we're looking at it now is we're working, around Syria, as NP office and the international staff, the non-Syrian staff, so that we are well positioned when access starts to open up. And likely what will happen, we would imagine the scenario being, is that all of Syria won't open up at the same time, but there will be pockets that will become accessible at some point, that will grow and grow and grow at some point. So we'd like to be there, make sure that we're very well aware of the context, that we have good relationships, so when those access points do open up, we can move in. Yeah.
And the stakeholders would also include the region of IS?
Well, ideally, I mean, there's people who need a lot of help there. So, I mean, you've got sort of in Syria, you've got the regime-controlled areas, sort of what is largely called the opposition-controlled areas, and then the extremist groups, which include, not limited to, but include ISIS or ISIL. Yeah. And so we are sort of looking at all of those areas. Being new to the region, for us, it's all about being knowing as much as we can about the context. So there's always entry points. There's always a way to work in an area. We are learning that at the moment and being humble and careful in our approach, not only for the safety and security of our own staff, of course, but also not to further endanger people by trying to implement approaches in a very unusual circumstance that maybe we don't know enough about. So the goal eventually is to try and reach out, and some people in those areas are able to reach out. Again, we go back to something like the online platform. That's a possibility for being able to reach into those areas and help people feel that they're not alone, and that there are things that, find out what they're already doing and how we can help sort of enhance and strengthen that.
What would you say, what is the biggest challenge and difference to the former places?
Yeah, I mean, it's coming from 5 years in South Sudan, when we can be under the mango tree with the community. Even myself in my role can be doing that very quickly, and we've got teams embedded all over the country. To being at such a distance, that's really the biggest challenge, and we're really just having to learn and adapt the tools. And one thing that we really recognize with NP and the work of UCP is it has to be flexible, it has to be adaptable, because even within one country, not every context is the same. So we have to be able to adapt it. So the biggest challenge is learning how to adapt, desperately wanting to get in the car and drive across that border and go talk to people face to face and be there, and not being able to do that. But of course, we're going to we're working on setting up programming in Lebanon itself, and perhaps in the other countries surrounding Syria. So that will help us a little bit to be able to do the work that we are more familiar with, which is being directly with the communities that we're supporting.
You mentioned EU is financing your approach. Is EU the only, or are there other?
At the moment, yeah, we have a 3-year grant with the EU to do this, together with our partner Madani, which is an organization that's registered in the UK, run by Syrians, and then they are one of the founding members of that network I mentioned more earlier, the Syrian Civil Coalition. Once we get more established in terms of being able to work and legally registered, and just the things you need to do when you're new to a country or new to a region, once that is sorted out, then we will be able to expand a little bit. What we have started doing was a series of small introductory workshops with Lebanese, Palestinian, and Syrian civil society to introduce the work of NP in Lebanon and to learn from them how they think it could be most useful. So while we're going through this other process of getting just the business of getting set up, we're also at the same time learning what could be most useful. And we've got some very clear ideas and very clear requests particularly from the refugee communities about sort of the types of challenges that they're facing, the types of personal violence, the friction that it has emerged just because of the overcrowding and the competition for resources between the host communities and these large refugee communities trying to share locations. And so there's pretty significant work that can be done.
Because I think a lot of competence also among the Syrian refugees.
Oh my goodness,
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
They're extraordinary people. They're extraordinary people. I mean, if you think of that, you know, most Syrians who are now displaced were professionals, middle class, teachers, lawyers, pharmacists, you know, and not only that, to see what they are doing inside Syria, they've basically formed a humanitarian community. And they are now the people who are distributing material aid. They're being first responders from a first aid point of view, from a psychosocial support point of view, to even just fixing infrastructure. They've learned how to, you know, quickly fix electricity and water sources because it gets bombed. And while the international community is surrounding, you know, very few internationals are actually inside Syria, but the Syrian community themselves have done this extraordinary work of mobilizing themselves. In this local cessation of hostilities agreement that has just happened, within hours of that agreement being signed, they had formed ad hoc monitoring groups.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's so impressive to see. So we're very humbled to see ourselves very much as we're here to support anything we can do to help, but really recognizing the primacy of Syrians in this role of taking, you know, they've got a lot of initiative in what they're doing. They're not helpless victims by any stretch of the imagination.
You have some optimism in that.
I have optimism about Syrians for sure. They're an extraordinary group of people, and who are caught in a situation that is no longer simply a Syrian struggle, as we all know. It's become, you know, Syria is now the breeding ground for the new Cold War, or not so cold. You know, it's an international where the international powers are playing out there. And Syrians are caught in the middle. This is the ultimate manifestation of what we talk about with UCP, is the unarmed civilian protection and peacekeeping work, is that the reason we do this is, well, powers that are beyond the individual citizen are at play. The individual civilian or citizen are the ones who suffer the most. And we see this in any conflict. And Syria is just a very hyper-exaggerated version of that, so which requires all the more reason for us to do everything we possibly can to help the people of Syria.
Is there anything that we in Germany can help you?
Well, I mean, I think that, Germany is playing such an extraordinary role, receiving so many Syrian refugees, and I certainly can tell you from the Syrian community that I talk to, they're so grateful for that. But I mean, I think it's just really recognizing the importance of from both the policy and foreign aid funding decisions, is to look at not only the material aid and the infrastructure, but also this other piece. So the civilian protection components and the social reconstruction work that is going to have the you know, cohesion and social fabric work that is going to have to go on for years to come. And I think you know, Germany's already really is quite progressive on those fronts anyways, but just a request to continue to be so and really keep the issues alive in the policy debates.
Thank you very much, Tiffany.
Thank you. It was great to see you.